Record. Hold on a second. Okay, now what kind of error occurred? Excuse me.
Oh, you're good.
Ah, okay. It's the things that cause us the most grief that actually elevate us to places that we never imagined we'd be. We don't want to go through any grief-related event that we've dealt with. But the reality is, grief is tantamount to growth. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Jay Lewis here. Welcome back to another episode of the Grief Empowerment Theory Livestream. The livestream that talks to people about knowing that whatever you've gone through, you can transform it into a pillar of strength. You can shift the momentum. And today, I have an incredible guest with me. This young lady is a former attorney who has now become a life coach. And she's recently just wrote a book. First off, I will talk all day about Miss Stephany Ann. But you know what, Stephany, take a second and just let the audience know a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on your intro because it is through the challenges, it is through the tough, hard times that we can redefine who we are and we can grow and learn and become a bigger, more fully expanded version of ourselves through all of that. And that's kind of been my journey as well. And so for me, I found myself on the floor just crying out to anything, anyone, God, the universe, source, myself, like why me? Why did I have to go through all of this? Why what did I do wrong? I'm a good person. I did everything right. I loved my ex-husbands. I loved my kids. I paid my taxes. I was a good citizen. Like by society standards, I did everything right. Yet still all these bad, terrible things just kept happening to me over and over and over again. To psychologically and emotionally abusive marriages. Kept repeating that pattern. My stepson's mother died of COVID, and then all of a sudden I had 6 little boys under the age of 14. I had a baby born with a rare genetic disorder. I lost a house in a house fire. I lost a house in Hurricane Ian. And then I lost my eyesight. And as I'm sitting there crying out to anyone to listen, what I do wrong? That's when I heard the voice saying, Stephany, you are not seeing your story through the right lens. You are stuck in this victim mentality, this victim cycle. You need to let it go and become the star and the hero of your story. And so it was through that process where I had to let go of a lot of things that kept me the smallest version of myself, because it is in those big moments, those life-changing moments, where we can say, this is who I am not, so that I can become who I was always meant to be.
That, first off, that is absolutely astounding when you talk about all the things that you've been through. But here's what's interesting. it we all write a story in our lives.
Mm.
We all write a book. And, you know, I'm using this metaphor considering the fact that you just wrote one. But reality is we are. We write a book on our life story. I was listening to Kevin Hart, and he said something that was interesting. He was like, how interesting do you want your book to be? Do
Mm.
you want your book to be something that people are just going to read the first chapter or so and put down, like a boring novel? Or are you going to be, like you said earlier, the hero? Because a hero has to overcome so much in order to identify themselves as being a hero. But,
Yes.
you know, I this is the reason why I love talking to people like yourself because it's you're the core of what this grief empowerment theory aspect is about. People can we talked about it backstage, people can take a victim's mentality to a circumstance. And don't get me wrong, there's a justifiable period where you're gonna have that feeling.
Mm.
Over time, you have one or two choices. You can become tired of being sick and tired, or you can find a way to become comfortable in your discomfort. One or two choices. Let me ask you, your book, you know, attributes of effectiveness. Now, that's leadership. That's a big aspect of things. How did you get involved in that particular book?
So I was actually at invited to speak at a human rights summit, and afterwards, the main author of the book invited me to contribute a chapter. And so I was actually going through a lot of grief at that time when she asked me. Um, my ex-husband had just committed suicide, and so I told her at first I told her I'd love to write a chapter and contribute to the book, and then committed suicide like a week later. And I wrote her back, I'm like, there's no way I can write anything right now. And she's like, Stephany, just, I know you can write something. I know you have something in you. So we will give you some grace and give you a little bit of time to get your chapter out. So this was actually a chapter I contributed to in a book on effective leadership where I talk about kind of post-traumatic growth and what I've done. And that's, you know, that's like these podcasts. This is post-traumatic growth. This is taking the trauma and the grief that we've been through and transforming it or transmuting it into something bigger and greater. And so I was very fortunate to be in that book. I have two other books coming out, one in Christmas, and I think what the other one's in the springtime of more on that story of becoming greater, more fully expanded versions of ourselves.
Okay, excellent, excellent. You know, it's interesting because when you look at making the choice to transform yourself, you know, first off, it's not easy, but that is a key mark of leadership. You see,
Mm,
all leaders have to start by learning to lead themselves.
yes.
And that beginning transition means that you have to identify yourself. You have to figure out what it is about you that will make you an effective leader, that will allow you
Mm,
to be able to create a message that people will resonate with. You know, it's it's in, it's amazing to think about because what you just talked about was being on things like, podcasts and public speaking and coming out of whatever other circumstance you were in, maybe, a work situation, maybe unfortunately a domestic violence circumstance, maybe whatever. Finding your voice, and that it starts with you deciding to
Yes.
actually make that decision. You know,
Yes.
how did you decide to
Ooh.
say to yourself, you know what? I'm done feeling like a victim. I'm going to go to that next level.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And I love the direction we're going here. So, for me, it was really just hitting that rock bottom, that people talk about when I lost everything, everything. And when people don't, when you say you've lost things, but like my house was destroyed in a hurricane. I lost every possession that I owned. Um, and my marriage crumbled. It was already shaky. It crumbled. I had to let that go. Then my ex-husband kills him, commits suicide. And then I have 3 little kids and I'm a solo parent all of a sudden. And just coming to this place of I had enough, was tired of repeating the cycles. Like, why did I keep repeating these cycles? And what was the deeper um, beliefs that were keeping me stuck on this victim cycle? And so for me, it was I just had enough. Like, this was not where I wanted my life to be. And I remember saying that so many times, like, how did I get here? This isn't the life I wanted. I don't I don't want this life. This isn't my life. But when you look at everything we do in life is choices, and every choice we make, there is an effect. There's a cause and effect to everything. And so here I am, I'm on this path, but I'm making this choice, and then this choice, and then this choice, and then this choice. But really, the highest version of myself is way over here. But how did I find myself way over here? And how do I get over here? And so, like you said, it starts with an intense desire to change, an intense desire to transform, an intense desire knowing that there is something greater within you. And how do you become that greater, more fully expanded version of you? And for many of us, we have to experience what we don't like. We experience what we do not prefer, because that is when we can
Well,
see what we do prefer. It's like, how do we know there's up if we don't know what down is? How do we know what light is if we don't know what darkness is? It's the polarity. We go through and we experience what we don't want so that we can become what we prefer. And so for me, it was hitting that rock bottom and saying, I am tired of these experiences that I've been creating. I do not prefer them. They do not define me. I do not want them in my life. And I don't want to remain the small version of me.
you know what? You did something that so many people don't want to do, which is take responsibility.
Yes.
You see, responsibility is different than
Mm.
blame or fault.
Yes.
A lot of people equate the two because there is one thing about responsibility that's interesting. It identifies anything that is a shortfall that we have had. Humans don't want to believe that it's everyone else's fault. It's not theirs.
Yes.
And when you take the responsibility role, you have a chance to see that, you know what, maybe that choice that I made wasn't the wisest choice. It's funny that you talked about aspects of choice because I have when I speak with my clients, I tell them choice. I put my hands up. Choice leads to a decision.
Mhm.
That decision will create an action of some sort,
Yes.
and then that action will always culminate into a consequence. Now, consequence, it doesn't have to be bad.
Mhm.
It's based off of your initial choice. And also realize that every situation can be rectified if it's not necessarily the best initial choice. You know, we're not doomed to live our circumstance.
Oh, no, and, that's a good point because so many of us w are like me, the older version of me, and what I was doing, I was trying to change circumstances, I was trying to change, uh, the environment. Well, what if we move? Well, guess what? We moved to Florida thinking sunshine would be the cure or just changing environments, but we showed up. I was there. And we tried to fix the circumstances. Well, maybe if I could just change my ex-husbands, maybe if they could be more loving and more nice and more respectful. Let me just fix them. But when we are focused on fixing and changing our circumstances, the events in our life, the situations in our life, changing our environment, you show up in all those places because that is not the cause of all your issues. You need to go within and change within. And when you change within, then all the external circumstances, events, and situations, those change.
And that is the the realest statement that I've heard in some time. See, a lot of us, we don't want to believe that the things that happen somehow, some way, we may have contributed to it, even in the smallest way,
Mm.
shape, or form.
Mhm.
Um, we spoke earlier. It's interesting because you are a big advocate against fighting against domestic violence. And we talked about the different forms of domestic violence, the physical forms, the mental forms, and then we talked about how genders are subject to different things. Women are subject to really mostly both situations with the physical and then the mental. Um, a lot of men don't necessarily have to deal with the physical. Some do, but it's mental, but it's still abuse in that way, shape, or form. And looking at the gender roles we talked about, like when it happens to a man, you don't want to admit that it happens because you
Mhm.
feel weak, and unfortunately, society has made it seem like a woman should understand being treated in a certain manner, which is absolutely not fair. You know, how do you speak to your how do you speak to the people you work with about these different things about, you know, identifying um if something happens, how to address it? Do you work with both men and women? And which was kind of the core of my question. And how do you address your approaches when you're dealing with, opposite genders and things like that, if you do?
Yeah, so, I currently am not working with any individuals. I'm more bringing awareness to domestic violence and narcissistic abuse, the emotional and psychological abuse, because for so many years we were just focused on physical violence. But what happens when you are in a relationship and it is emotionally and psychologically abusive? You hear that phrase all the time, gaslighting. Gaslighting is coercive control. Gaslighting is when you um, manipulate another person into doubting their perceptions, experiences, or understanding of events. And that is psychological and emotional abuse. And so, what I do is raise awareness that, hey, these two things are mutually exclusive. Aren't mutually exclusive. Abuse is abuse. But addressing what you were saying, it happens to men as often as it happens to women, but men, because of more of the guilt, the shame, the stigma attached to it, many men do not come forward and share their stories. Many women don't come forward and share their stories as well, which is why I started sharing my stories, because here I am. I'm an educated woman. I'm an attorney. I won the governor's award for my work in domestic violence, and I did not know I was in abusive marriages. Now let that sink in, because I didn't know.
Right.
And that is my background. That is how subtle emotional and psychological abuse can be. It can be so subtle that you don't see it until it is just, too late. But when you look at like abuse and trauma is our reaction to things that have happened. We, the victims, are the ones that attach trauma to it, attach that label to the experience.
Very true. You know, and the other part, see, it becomes difficult to understand because one, it happens so subtly, and it happens over the course of time. I
Mhm.
mean, again, we talked about this before. It's I was in a 26-year relationship, and it was interesting because I was definitely gaslighted at certain stages and things like that. Excellent. She was a beautiful woman. It's just that I realized the person that I had to kind of become, the person that I realized that certain things you know, were placing me into the person I had become, but not realizing the most important part. And you said this earlier. You are responsible.
Mhm.
Every aspect. See, other people play a role. They play a role, but ultimately, you allow them to play that role.
Oh, and that is a hard pill to swallow, right?
Yes, it's now when you again when you do these when you speak to groups, when you have that, I'm sure some people come to you and they say, "Well, you don't know about my situation. My situation is such." I hear that all the time with my clients. And, everyone wants to believe that their situation is special and different. And don't get me wrong, there are differences in your personal circumstance, but the reality is you're going through something, somebody else down the road is going through something. And as a matter of fact, what I've heard in life is that somebody's situation might be worse than yours. You know, how do you how do you talk a person off the ledge if they're having that type of thing? And like you said, you don't really do one-on-one type of things, but like when you speak with people, like I said before, I'm sure people come back to you and ask you things. What are some of the things that you say to let them know that, you know, again, you are not a victim?
Yeah. So, um, I think one of the big things is when people hear my story, it is relatable on almost every level because, yeah, I was into abusive marriages. Oh, you have a kid with a disability? Oh, I did too. Oh, you lost a loved one to COVID? I did too. My cat died in a house fire. I lost my house. I lost everything I own in a hurricane. I have an ex-husband who committed suicide. I went to jail, not once, but twice. I lost my kids from a delusional ex-husband. And so, I'm not saying it like, "Oh, I can one up you." I'm saying this is was the old version of me and the old reality that I lived in. And once when you find yourself hitting this rock bottom, this complete like I'm a victim, um, but there's got to be something more. The first thing we want to do is we want to find out what happened to us and why. How did we get here? And as we transcend through the different stages of, I call it the stages of consciousness, but it could be, we go through the grief, we go through the shame, we go through the anger, and as we release all these big heavy emotions, as we let go of the anger, like I didn't wake up one morning and say, oh, I'm going to forgive my ex-husbands and I'm going to be the star today. I was pissed off, I was angry, I was mad, I hated them. I hated them for what they put me through. And then the grief when my ex-husband died, I was happy. Everyone else is crying and sad. I was happy because guess what? The abuse stopped.
Right, right.
And so that is a different aspect. But, coming to this place of taking full responsibility for our thoughts, for our actions, for our behaviors, for the life we created and now do not like, do not prefer, it was a wave to come to this place in my life. And so, yes, I've forgiven. Yes, I've moved forward. Yes, I have become the star of my story, but it was a process.
Absolutely. It Stephanie Ann, I can 100% relate to what you're saying. Like I said, I was um I was married to a person that I totally thought was the love of my life.
Mm.
No, and again, was a good person, but you know, certain things when it came in relation to our marriage, it was interesting. And she unfortunately passed away. And you know, in the beginning, what you just said, in the beginning, I felt like you got what you deserved, But then I had to take a retrospective look of things and
Mm.
say, like you said before, listen, man, you have to kind of forgive situations, let it go, because you will never grow.
Mhm.
See, what happens is it's interesting. I heard this saying. It's like regret is like swallowing poison and hoping the other person dies.
Mhm.
You and that's difficult. I know when you talk to groups and you tell them forgiveness is a key aspect to growth and forward progress. And everybody looks back and they look and they're like, I can't forget. I can't. I get this person did this. You know how? What do you? What are some of the techniques? What are some of the things? Some of the methods that you suggest to your listeners?
Yeah, so, you know, for whatever reason, there is this negative paradigm around the word forgiveness. So what I say instead is revision. Let's just revise the story. So if you could revise your story, what would that look like? Every night when you go to bed, revise your day. Do better. Be better. If there were moments in your day as you're laying in bed at night, moments where you were not being the person that you know you could be, revise it. And that's forgiveness. Forgiveness is revision. And so if you could go back, like I could go back and look at my 2 marriages, how would I revise them? What would they look like? And when you revise it, you've made it perfect and you release them. Let them go. And so for a long time, when I would have thoughts of my ex-husbands or my former life, um, there's a lot of people, when we're stuck in this victim consciousness, we want to ruminate. We want to go live in the past. But the past is the past. It's an older version of you. Why would you want to go live in the past? Revise it and let it go. Live in the now.
It's interesting because see, I think a big part of grief is the fact that people want to fight the past. It's almost like you want to get a time machine and go back and fix what you know now.
Mhm.
But the reality is you can't go back, and everything that you've gone through is a part of the teaching. It's up to you to actually take the lesson.
Yes. Because so many of us, if we don't, uh, revise the past, we'll just continue to repeat the patterns. And the patterns are the lessons. How do you know what the lessons are if you don't sit down and revise the story? We're editors, right? That's what we're talking in the beginning. We are the star of our story. We are the writer. We are the director. We get to choose who the star players are. Make yourself the star in your movie. And if you don't like things that have happened to you, revise it and then let that part of the story go. And so I say revision because so many people have a negative paradigm about the word forgiveness. Um, Revise it, let it go. That was an edit. And that edit, that revision is the person you want to become because that's how you want to act in your relationships. That's how you want your relationships to be. That's why you can revise it and let it go.
And what's the other part of when you become have that feeling of victimhood? You know, as at there's a small part of you that was making the attempt to control the circumstance, just like the other person. You see, you want it to be your way. They want it to be their way. It's it was a matter of who was controlling who, but the reality is what you just said was interesting is let it go. Let but then a big part of forgiveness is first learning to forgive yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Forgiving yourself for being mistreated, forgiving yourself for staying too long, forgiving yourself for not fully understanding everything you were going through, forgiving yourself that you were being manipulated and lied to and you allowed it. And I say allowed it in when you take responsibility for it. When you're in the victim consciousness, the victim mindset, it's hard to take responsibility for these things. It comes later, but it's forgiving yourself for all those things. Forgiving yourself for why didn't I choose a better partner? Forgiving yourself for why did I change all these aspects of me to make him happy? What forgiving yourself for putting your happiness and your desires and your wants and needs on the back burner while you worshiped the ground they walked on. Forgiving yourself for reacting and for living in a place of reaction. There's
It,
that. Oh, go ahead.
no, no, please finish. Because see, what's all I was going to say was, you know what, Stephanie Ann, you are so right because it, when you don't take that again, that initial responsibility, the chain effects of those understandings, they won't happen. It
Yeah.
has to start with you taking that responsibility. And then once you take that responsibility, then, like you said, you can cascade forgiveness and it will start with you. And then you'll start to understand, you know what? These things happen. I may have allowed these things to be. I may have, you know, whatever I did to it. It sure the other person they did these things to me, but somehow I allowed it to occur. But I but now I'm not allowing it to happen any further. You know,
Yes.
when you finally put your foot down, what changed for you in that respect? What mentally changed? What physical changes started around you? What were those things that occurred?
Yeah. So when you come to a point where you have had enough, where this was not the life you desired nor you wanted, where you find the courage or the worthiness or the desire that you were meant for something more, you will put your foot down and you will leave. And so, there's this statistic around victims of domestic violence. Like, they say statistically, it takes, 6 to 8 times of attempting to leave before you finally leave. Right? I don't know if you've heard that statistic. And so, when you start to entertain this idea that you were meant for something more, that you are not going to tolerate cheating, abuse, manipulation, when you've had enough, you start to entertain these ideas. What would my life look like if I was on the other side? What would my life look like if I got out of this relationship? And so we start dreaming, we start imagining. And so then we take action, we go to leave. And then what happens is worry and doubt hit. Well, what if I can't make it on my own? I don't have a job. How am I going to provide for myself? Oh my God, I've been a single mom. I've been a stay at home mother and I have 3 little kids. How are we going to survive? And he's told me that no one else will love me. No one else will treat me this way. I can't go be homeless now. I'm not going to go to a woman's shelter. Worry and doubt, and then fear paralyzes you. So you go back and then you keep entertaining this idea. But what if? What if it's better? Maybe I'm going to reach out to an organization. Maybe I'm just going to go see. Maybe I'm going to start stashing some money away somewhere. Maybe I'm going to take an online class. Maybe my friends or family or someone can help me. So again, you're entertaining the idea. And then one day you take action again. You go, and this time you leave and you go to a friend's house for 2 nights. He's calling you, he's love bombing you. Come back, baby, I miss you. Come back, it'll be good. Yeah, just come back. We'll work it out. We always do. I love you, blah, 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 blah. Worry and doubt kick in again. Am I making this up? Is he really going to change? He said he's changed. Okay, that's all I want. All I want is for him to love me and respect me and treat me as a person I know I'm supposed to be. Okay, he said he's changed. I'm going to go back. You go back. It's nice for a week. And then the old patterns and behaviors kick in again. You go back to your daydreaming. I don't want this life anymore. It has to be so much better. There's got to be something better for me and my children. You start imagining again, and the cycle kicks in. Worry and doubt, the fear. But this time you know you've made it 2 nights. What would a week look like? What would a month? And you see, every time you hit that terror barrier of fear, you push through it a little bit more each time. And each time you're going from that knowledge and experience that you can do this. It's hard. It is hard. Is it worth it? It is absolutely worth it. You have to push through that fear, and knowing that fear is just an illusion. You push through that fear and you get on the other side of fear, and that's where true freedom, and that's when you can look back and say, I did not prefer that version of myself. Let me create a bigger, grander, more magnificent version of me. And what does that look like? I've conquered the fear.
Well, let me explain something. The way you're talking, that was one reason why I wanted you on the show because seriously, the grief empowerment theory is absolutely about what you're saying. It's about understanding that what are you going to do? How are you going to become a victor based off of the situation? And there's one thing I speak with my clients about all the time is you have to understand that nothing grows without going through the challenges. It,
Mhm.
Steve Harvey said this very funny thing. He goes, everything you've been through, all the rough stuff, the challenges, the hardships, that's just dirt. That's just manure. He's like, but nothing great, gr- nothing that's great doesn't grow without having any dirt on it. He's like, look at the
Mhm.
flowers. You know, it, some of them you got to go through manure. I mean, it, the lotus flower grows in a swamp.
Mhm.
You know, but and the reason why I say that is all these things. that we look at as those challenges are actually catalysts to the better version of us.
Yes.
Allow me to ask, I mean, for you, you know, when you finally made that decision to say, I'm gone for good, how did you bring it to you have 3 children. How did you bring it to them in that respect? And once you answer this, then I wanted to make a comment about the whole solo parenting thing as well. But please talk about how, as a mother, you had to navigate having that conversation with your children.
Yeah. Yeah. So, my first marriage, I was married for 14 years to a covert narcissist. And he was the one, after years of emotional and psychological abuse he put me through. When we divorced, he continued to use legal as a way to further the abuse. And this is very common, very, very, very common. But I had full custody of the children, and he had every other weekend parenting plan. And so, um, my boys they were little when we went through that separation and divorce. Um, and so then when I moved and met my second husband, and we got together and married, and then, everything in the beginning was wonderful. They call that the idolization phase. It was beautiful. We were creating this really beautiful life, so I thought. That's why I call it the fairy tale. um, and so we were creating this beautiful life, and then when 2020 hit, that's when the mask came off. That's when the devaluation began, and that's when everything changed. And so, because my kids lived with us full time, I was very open with them. I was always open with them about their father's behavior. And now with their stepfather, I was very open. Like, okay, if he's devaluing someone or putting someone down, I'd pull my kids aside and say, hey, that's not how we treat people. That's not how I taught you to treat people. Um, and so I just was really open and honest with them about things. There were some addictions. Both were alcoholics and had addictions in that sense. And so I would talk to my kids about this. I would talk to my kids about their behavior. And so when I ended up leaving my second husband, I was open and honest with my kids. And my second husband, we share the toddler. Um, and I had to go no contact, and I had to do what was um, in the best interest of my children and me. And I took my kids and basically moved 3,000 miles away and filed in a different state, in a different jurisdiction. And so, I also changed the conversation in my head. And so when we go back to taking full responsibilities for our actions and behaviors, and again, when we say we're taking full responsibility for our part, I'm not saying that um, you wanted all this abuse, you wanted blah, blah, blah. Like, no, but you are taking responsibility and actions for your reactions to
Right.
the things that have happened to you. Because that's all you can take responsibility for, is for your behavior and for your thoughts and emotions and feelings. And so I changed the internal dialogue. So with my first husband, I said, this is going to be hard. This is going to be challenging. He's going to fight us. It's going to be hard on the kids. It's going to be hard on me. I'm probably going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's going to be a nightmare. He is still trying to control me outside the marriage. And guess what? That was the reality that I created. So, second time around, I'm learning, I'm growing. Second time around, I changed the dialogue. I said, I'm going no contact. He's not going to follow me. He is not going to reach out. He's not going to be involved. He's not even going to respond. He's going to default. I'm going to get everything I want. I'm getting full custody of the kids, and he is never going to speak to me again. It has been almost 2 years, and I'm still living in that reality that I have created. We are powerful creators.
Uh,
We create our reality. Change the dialogue in your mind if you do not like what is manifesting in your world.
and that's the most interesting part, because changing the dialogue means that you have to change something about you, something that maybe you might have desired that didn't necessarily work to your advantage. And instead of trying to force that square peg into that round hole, you can now say, you know what? Maybe that particular thinking is what led me down this rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Now, now I want to look at a different way of thinking in order for me to progress to a point where I need to. But um I just wanted to acknowledge the whole solo parent aspect. You know what? You are not a solo parent. You are what I call a soul solo parent.
Oh.
And it's different because, see, soul solo parenting means that, again, you don't have, there's no one else that will ever address the situation. Like you said, it, your your recent ex-husband unfortunately committed suicide. You know, even if you and him did have a dialogue together when he was alive, you know, um that it's different than now, where you can't you can't even address anything. You know, you can't go to the graveyard, ask for any assistance with the kids. You can't go ask for any money. No, I, I had to face that fact. And that's why I coined the phrase solo parenting, because see, solo parents, they're we're all lumped into a variety of categories. I mean, there are solo parents through a divorce. That's a whole different situation. There are solo parents who, maybe because their husband or wives have been deployed overseas. That's
Hmm.
a different situation. Then there's solo parents like us who will never be able to see the other party, whether you're done with them or whether you just whatever the situation is. So it means that you have to do every I consider this role of parenting the chief cook and bottle washer role, because it's hey, like you said, even though you may have a nanny that gives you some assistance, right? There are some people that don't have that ability. And even though you have that ability, it's still totally different, because you you as a mother have to work with not only your physical, emotional, mental well-being, you have to do the same thing for your children,
Mm,
you know,
yeah.
simultaneously. And see, um, a parent of divorce, not that they don't have that, but it's different because you have to have the conversation of daddy's not here because he's, whatever has happened. versus daddy's not here because he's halfway across the country.
Yeah.
You know, and then there's, like you said, then there's the emotional feeling of, you know, I couldn't make this work. I couldn't do this. I couldn't do that. And now I'll never be able to because they're not here. So again, that weighs on your mind. That's clearly not true, but what I'm saying is that's what weighs on your mind. And then you're dealing with the things like financial matters, where you just said before, you're raising children on your own. You're doing everything on your own. You know, you get no true assistance. And then your friends groups change. You
Yeah.
know, the people you used to think had your back, you know, not that they don't have your back, that they don't have in the way that you thought they would. It's like, hey, their life has moved forward and you're still in whatever place you're in. And you expect them to be in your place to a certain degree. And please correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's interesting in in that respect that when you talked about the fact that you had to make a lot of changes, but then the reality is it's not your fault that these things happened. But you have stepped up to say it doesn't matter that it's not my fault. It is my responsibility to fix it.
Yeah, so, let me touch on a few of the things that you brought up. So, going back to not being able to have those conversations or have the closure, as humans, there's something very, settling to have the closure. But what happens when you can't have that closure? And sometimes in these relationships, whether someone has died or whether you've gone completely no contact and moved cross country, um, you're not going to get the closure. So that's where the revision comes in, the forgiveness, the revision. So in your imagination, you can go there and you can have the closure with that person the way you want to have that closure. And then you can let it rest. You can release them and you can move on with your life. Um, for me, when I decided that there needed to be a change, because what was working the past 20 years of constantly repeating these patterns, kind of being stuck on that hamster wheel of having these bad relationships or all these bad things happening to me, you have to change the cause. And the cause is the way we think, we emotionalize our thoughts and the things that we have taken action on. So when I took responsibility for my thoughts, for the internal conversations I was having, that internal arguing, all that stuff that creates our physical reality, when I took responsibility for it and said, I've had enough, I'm going to change the cause, which is the way we think, which could even be interpreted as our attitude on life. Um, when I did that, I also said, I am going to create a more powerful version of me. And this is why I can't be angry with my ex husbands for the things they did because they have empowered me. Just like your podcast, it is we can either become empowered, and this can be a launch pad for the greatest, most magnificent version of us that we can even imagine, or we can just choose to ruminate on the past and ruminate on all the bad, terrible things that have ever happened to us in our life. And I'm a victim and my life sucks and this is just the way it's going to be. We have a choice.
I,
And so what I did not look at myself as a solo parent victim. I'm not on welfare. Actually, I was for a couple months because I needed it as I was transitioning, but then I got off of it because the version of me is not on it. The version of me is she's successful. She is abundant. She is prosperous. She is powerful. She knows who she is. And so, yeah, she's a single parent, or a solo parent, but she gets stuff done. My kids go to this hybrid homeschool thing. I homeschool my kids. My kids play on a very competitive, very successful soccer club. Hey, I get them to practice all the time. I always have food. I always have gas. I do not say this is hard because I'm tired of living a hard life. I say my life is full. My life is fun. My life is exciting. And I created a grander version of myself. And then I became that grander version of myself. And this is for everyone. It's not just for me.
you know, I'm first. I'm gonna end it on this note, but you have just said a mouthful because seriously, it goes back to what I was talking about. This is the premise of the grief empowerment theory, getting people to understand that you have the choice. You can be the victim or the victor, but it begins with the initial choice you decide to make. Or not even the initial choice. It just depends on when you make that choice to
Mhm.
stop feeling like a victim and start telling yourself, I'm stronger than this. Stephany Ann, I just want to say thank you so much for the incredible gift that you've been able to give to this audience today, that you've been able to let people know that, you know what? They're not just, they're not victims. You are whatever you feel you are.
Yes. Yes. Mhm.
So again, I just want to say thank you so much, and I truly appreciate your time. So,
Thank you for having me today. It's an honor, and I really enjoyed our conversation.
ladies and gentlemen, again, um, please pick up Miss Stephany Ann's book. It's called Leadership: Attributes of Effective Leadership. Excuse me, got issue with my reading. My bad. But the point the point I was making is seriously, the goal is to tell yourself that you're not a victim. And once you tell yourself you're not a victim, you will no longer be a victim. So again, thank you for your time, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for attending another episode of the Grief Empowerment Theory. My name is Jay Lewis III. Um, I'm a grief empowerment strategist. And thank you again for taking the time to talk with me. Stephany, I appreciate that. Have a good day, everyone.